So much of spiritual self-work, self-actualization, contemplative practice is always about reducing suffering, right? Regardless of tradition, it's about how essentially can we make our lives better. We hear the words bliss a lot. We hear the words being in the right place at the right time, not the wrong place at the right time. And so we can often get into a place where we think that the more we practice, so to speak, that life is going to, just fall all into place. And to a certain extent, and in many regards, it certainly does. But there are still, of course, moments, I'm not the first to acknowledge this amongst spiritual practitioners and teachers, that there are going to be many moments when you don't get what you want. And in the Vedic tradition, unlike other traditions, we don't conceive of desires as inherently bad. We think of them as just the cosmic jet fuel that takes you from place to place, person to person, instance to instance in your life, so that you have the contact with whomever, whatever you are meant to for further evolution. And yet, we can still not get what we want. Our hearts can still be broken. We can be disappointed. And yet we'll often say in this tradition that while we feel all of that and we feel the vicissitudes of life, we aren't necessarily suffering as a result of such. That internal contentment, that internal locus of control of feeling that all is essentially well, that this too shall pass, that I am that I am more than whatever I am materially experiencing, that can subsist and sustain us even in the ups and downs. But on a practical level, on the human level, especially as we're growing, because that is also a capacity. It's like a muscle, just like following charm is a muscle, being able to integrate and accept, all of the ups and downs of life is a skill. It's a muscle that gets easier with practice and that gets more second nature the more integrated we are in this purview. So I was thinking particularly about this with regards to, she wasn't a main teacher of mine, but she was a very important teacher of mine and kind of mentor for a few years in my early 20s. Her name was Benita Valente. And I knew she had passed. I had been thinking about her this fall. It's kind of one of those, trippy, intuitive things. And then over Christmas, the Metropolitan Opera was replaying a lot of her broadcast. I wanted to go back and look at some of the obituaries because I hadn't really done so when she passed. And I always knew this about her. She had conveyed it to me, and whenever I brought her up to other people, they would always comment on this. But it was really interesting to see it commented on by all of the top critics of the time, as well as the Times in this recent article, or the obituary, which is that she was an artist in many ways. Even if you didn't love her voice, you didn't find it, the most interesting or beautiful, people never really seemed to criticize the artistry. Like, she was a singer. Vast arrays of people, from directors to conductors to other singers to teachers. You mentioned that name and it was almost always met with I love her. She's such a great singer, she's such a great artist. You couldn't really indict any particular part of her preparation because it was always so clean, so even, so full. And yet, as the Times critics back then and even today would remark, there was such a gap between her prodigious gifts and her kind of seeming lack of renown. She still sang in a lot of major houses, and she did a lot of things, and she won the Met auditions, studied at, wonderful places, but was not necessarily like the marquee name of her time. And this certainly had a little bit to do with the size of her voice and just the nature of that. But, there are certainly people with small instruments who have had huge careers. And many people in general who maybe weren't as immaculate an artist, but who became really well known. And this definitely, we wouldn't say that she was bitter. I mean, she could be very kind and generous, but it definitely was a point of frustration. I think I saw it at moments, and certainly people that knew her much better could comment on it because they saw her over a longer period in time. And so I just started thinking about how does one essentially accept that which is versus what, quote, should be, what could have been. And there's a Hafiz poem that I believe it ends something about forgive the dream. And I often think of that line, forgive the dream, forgive life, forgive whatever ideal you felt you were confined to, and allow yourself to be released to what actually is, because there might be some greater, deeper, even if it's not as storybook perfect, epic that's awaiting for you when you kind of surrender to that. And she definitely was someone who deeply knew herself, and she was fearless and could be very direct and critical and honest in a funny way that you wouldn't expect from this like older, smaller woman. In a way, the frustration that she had between, sort of not getting, quote, her due, if you want to think of it that way, it forced her to go more inside and to go return to singing art song in these venues that loved and appreciated her and got her. And she could focus on the art, she didn't have to focus on the business or focus on, some of these other things that sometimes can distract perhaps lesser talented or less polished people who, for whatever reason, take off. And she, in many ways, paid me one of the highest compliments of my life. We had like a 2-hour interview before I ever sang for her. And at the end of that time, she shared a lot with me about her own journey. And I shared with her how I got to be sitting in that room that day. And she said, well, I haven't heard you sing yet, but I think, you'll go far because you seem to really know yourself. And I think she was talking in essence about herself. Not that go far is so subjective, like where are we starting from? What do we want? What do we think we want? Who can tell? A long life could be 60, it could be 90, it could be going far is sort of not the point. The point is to know thyself. And that's really the point of all spiritual practice. To me, that's the point of all artistic practice. And I do think that she achieved that in her life for whatever frustrations, bitterness, difficulty may have crept in. She kind of has the last laugh in essence, I think, her legacy, because what does any artist want to be remembered for is that, and there were certainly flashier, bigger names, but we sometimes associate that with their downfall or how they crashed and burned or, that horrible debacle they got into with the conductor. How do we handle the lemons, I suppose, that life gives us or just not exactly getting what we want? I think it's to go more deeply into it and to sit with it. We can still practice with it, to know that that is not the defining tenor and flavor of life, but that it is a part of it. And it's usually the gift that unlocks so much more about our very self.